He was just a poor, single father fighting to save his sick son. But when the little boy pointed at a powerful CEO in the hospital and whispered, "That's Mommy," the entire room froze. What happened next shook their lives forever. The night air outside the city hospital was heavy with mist, wrapping the worn bricks of the old building in a blanket of damp silence. Inside, the sterile corridors stretched endlessly, washed in cold fluorescent light that gave no comfort to those who paced their lengths. The echo of each step was swallowed by the walls, leaving only the weight of worry that seemed to linger in every corner. For Marcus Bennett, those halls had become a second home, though never one he wished for. At 38, he carried the face of a man who had endured storms few could imagine. His skin, dark and weathered by years of hard labor at the docks, bore the lines of fatigue and unspoken sorrow. His hands, rough and calloused from moving cargo, now trembled as they cradled his 4-year-old son, Eli. The boy's small frame seemed even more fragile against his father's broad chest, his thin arms clinging with quiet desperation as fever burned across his delicate skin. Eli wore his favorite dinosaur pajamas, bright green with little prints of T-Rexes and brontosaurs, as if the cheerful pattern could shield him from the cruel reality of illness. His eyes, wide and innocent, shimmered with a light that pain could not extinguish, though his cheeks were flushed with heat. His tiny lips parted as he whispered in a voice barely stronger than a breath, asking if the doctors could make him better. Marcus forced his lips to shape a reassuring smile, though his chest felt as though it were caving in. He tightened his arms around the boy, careful not to disturb the IV line taped to his hand. "Yes, son, they will help you," he murmured, his deep voice steady but laced with exhaustion. He wanted to believe his own words, but the truth gnawed at him. He had spent sleepless nights staring at medical bills stacked on his worn kitchen table, bills he could never hope to pay with the meager wages he earned, unloading ships and hauling crates. Every shift at the port left his body aching, yet it was never enough. Every extra hour worked meant leaving Eli in the care of neighbors, when what the boy needed most was his father by his side. The balance was impossible, a cruel trap from which Marcus saw no escape. The past 4 years had been a relentless struggle. From the moment Eli's illness was diagnosed, Marcus's world had turned upside down. He had given up every trace of comfort, traded his dreams for survival, and poured every ounce of strength into keeping his son alive. The nights were the hardest, when Eli's fever would spike and Marcus would sit awake, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, whispering stories to ease his pain. Alone in their small apartment, the silence would stretch endlessly, broken only by the sound of Eli's shallow breathing. There were times Marcus had thought he would collapse, but he never allowed himself to. He had promised himself that his son would never see him break, that Eli would always know his father was strong enough to face anything. But strength had its limits, and tonight Marcus felt dangerously close to them. As they walked down the corridor, Marcus's gaze drifted to the glass wall of a brightly lit conference room. Inside, a group of executives sat around a polished mahogany table, their suits crisp, their laptops glowing with charts and financial projections. The air was thick with importance, a different world entirely from the worn-out waiting chairs and vending machines Marcus knew too well. For a fleeting moment, he felt invisible, as though he and Eli were nothing more than shadows passing by the lives of people who could never understand what it meant to count every dollar or pray that a doctor would show mercy. To them, he thought bitterly, families like his were statistics on a spreadsheet, numbers that could be shifted or erased without consequence. Suddenly, Eli stirred in his arms. The boy's fevered eyes lit up with an energy that startled Marcus. His small hand lifted weakly, pointing through the glass at the head of the table where a woman stood addressing the group. Her hair was golden, tied neatly at the back of her head, and her tailored white suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She exuded authority, her posture commanding attention even among men twice her age. To Marcus, she was a stranger. But to Eli, she was something else entirely. "Daddy, look," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement despite his illness. "That's Mommy! That's Mommy!" The words struck Marcus like a physical blow. His arms stiffened around his son, his chest tightening until it hurt to breathe. For years, he had buried her memory, locked it away where it could not wound him. Claire Hudson, the woman who had once been his world, his partner, the mother of his child. The woman who had walked out of their lives when Eli was barely a year old, chasing ambition Marcus could never compete with. No letters, no phone calls, no explanation beyond the silence of her absence. He had been left with nothing but a child and a hollow ache where his trust used to be. And now, here she was, standing less than 30 feet away, wrapped in the aura of power and wealth. A CEO, a leader, a figure the world admired, while Marcus had been left to raise their son in poverty and exhaustion. "No, Eli," Marcus whispered hoarsely, his throat tight. "That's not Mommy." But even as the words left his mouth, his heart betrayed him. His eyes lingered on her face, and for the first time in years, the truth he had tried to bury clawed its way back. It was her. Eli's small voice rang out again, louder this time, filled with certainty. "Mommy! Mommy!" His little hands reached toward the glass, as if distance were nothing, as if love could erase 2 years of absence. Inside the conference room, Claire's voice faltered. She turned her head slightly, her sharp gaze catching the movement in the hallway. Her eyes locked onto Marcus, then drifted to the boy in his arms. The color drained from her face. For a moment her mask of authority crumbled, replaced by raw shock. Her lips parted soundlessly, as though she had seen a ghost. She excused herself abruptly, ignoring the puzzled stares of her colleagues, and strode toward the door with unsteady steps. Each click of her heels echoed through the hall, closing the distance between her and the life she had abandoned. Marcus's chest tightened with rage and sorrow, his feet rooted to the floor. His son squirmed in his arms, reaching desperately as Claire approached. "Mommy, Mommy, I knew it was you." His small cries pierced the sterile air, his joy untainted by the bitterness that consumed his father. The hospital lights illuminated every flicker of emotion across their faces. Shock in Claire's, anguish in Marcus's, innocence in Eli's. The air grew thick, suffocating, as past and present collided with a force that left no room to breathe. Claire stopped just a step away, her eyes trembling as she looked at the child she had left behind and the man whose heart she had broken. Marcus's jaw tightened, his grip on Eli protective, his silence louder than any words. Time seemed suspended, the sterile hallway transformed into an arena where wounds of the past reopened under the harsh fluorescent glow. In that moment, Marcus felt the years of loneliness and struggle crash back into him. Every night he had held Eli through fevers. Every day he had worked until his body broke. Every unanswered question about why she had left. Yet beneath the bitterness, another truth lingered. The woman standing before him was not only the CEO the world admired, but also the mother his son longed for, the ghost of a love he had once believed would last forever. He saw the flicker of pain in her blue eyes, a pain she tried to mask but could not hide. And in that fragile instant, Marcus realized that whatever storm had begun, it was only the beginning. Claire stood frozen in the cold corridor, her pulse hammering so violently that it drowned out the muted noises of the hospital around her. The harsh, fluorescent lights revealed every tremor in her face, every flicker of fear she tried so desperately to hide. For years, she had built an empire on control and precision, on never allowing weakness to breach the surface. But now, confronted with Marcus and the fragile boy in his arms, the fortress of her carefully constructed life seemed to collapse in an instant. Eli's eyes shimmered with recognition, his little arms outstretched as he clung to the word he had long dreamed of speaking aloud. "Mommy." The word was both salvation and condemnation. Marcus remained rigid, his jaw set, his grip protective, as if he feared she might snatch the boy away and vanish again. His silence burned louder than any accusation. The bitterness in his eyes cut deeper than knives, reminding her of the night she had left. She had told herself she was doing the right thing, chasing a future that could secure stability and greatness. But as she stared into Eli's small face, the innocence she had abandoned, the lie unraveled inside her chest. Every boardroom victory, every headline praising her rise, all of it meant nothing compared to the warmth she had forsaken. She tried to speak, but her throat closed on the words. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a broken whisper. "Marcus." It was all she could manage. his name trembling in the air between them. His reply was silence, heavy and merciless, his eyes filled with storms she knew she had no right to calm. She lowered herself to Eli's level, her hand trembling as she reached out. Her fingers brushed against the child's sleeve before Marcus drew him back instinctively, the motion sharp with mistrust. Her heart fractured at the gesture, yet she understood. She had forfeited her right to his trust long ago. Eli, too young to understand the wounds between his parents, reached stubbornly toward her, his voice insistent. "Mommy, hold me. I missed you." His innocence was unbearable. Claire's chest constricted as tears welled up, spilling despite her will to hold them back. She pressed her palm against the floor to steady herself, the cold tile grounding her in the reality of the moment. She wanted nothing more than to gather her son into her arms and whisper apologies that could never erase the pain of her absence. Marcus's voice finally cut through the suffocating silence, low and steady, but each word fell like a hammer. "You don't get to just walk back into his life, Claire. 2 years of silence, 2 years of me carrying this alone. Where were you when he was crying in the night, when the doctors told me he might not survive?" His voice cracked with the weight of those memories. The fury in his eyes was not just anger, it was grief. It was betrayal. It was the echo of every sleepless night he had endured alone. Claire's lips trembled as she struggled to explain. "I know I failed you. I failed him. But please, Marcus, let me make this right. I've thought about him every single day. I told myself I was doing what was best, but I was wrong." Her words fell like fragile glass, breaking as soon as they left her mouth. She saw no forgiveness in Marcus's eyes, only the deep, aching wound of a man who had been left behind. Behind the glass wall of the conference room, eyes had begun to gather. Executives, assistants, men and women who knew Claire only as the flawless CEO, now stared with curiosity at the unraveling scene. Among them stood Robert Miller, her ambitious deputy, his sharp gaze locked on her with quiet calculation. For months he had watched her rise with envy, despising how she commanded respect he had long craved for himself. And now, as he observed her falter in the presence of a man in worn work clothes and a sick child, Robert's lips curled into a smile so thin it seemed carved from malice. He saw not a reunion of mother and child, but an opportunity, a fracture in her armor he could exploit. He leaned closer to a colleague, whispering just loudly enough to plant seeds of suspicion. "Imagine the scandal if the board finds out she abandoned her family for ambition, only to reappear now. What would shareholders think of their pristine CEO entangled in such a mess?" His companion gave a skeptical glance, but the idea took root. Robert's mind was already racing, shaping this moment into ammunition he would use to finally bring her down. Out in the hallway, Claire's tears glistened under the harsh lights. Marcus's coldness was unbearable, but Eli's small body squirmed with hope, his fevered cheeks pressed against his father's shoulder as he reached again toward her. "Please, Daddy, let Mommy hold me." The boy's innocent plea pierced Marcus's resolve. He hesitated, his chest heaving with the torment of choice. He wanted to deny her, to shield his son from the risk of abandonment again. But the longing in Eli's eyes was undeniable, a longing that no father's love could erase. Slowly, reluctantly, Marcus loosened his hold and allowed the boy to slip into Claire's trembling arms. The moment Eli's small frame pressed against her, Claire collapsed into sobs, clutching him as though she would never let go again. The scent of his hair, the warmth of his tiny body, shattered the years of distance. She whispered apologies into his ear, her tears dampening his pajamas, while he clung to her with a trust untainted by the bitterness that clouded the air between his parents. Marcus watched in silence, torn between the sight of his son's happiness and the raw ache of his own mistrust. Robert, watching from behind the glass, narrowed his eyes as he raised his phone. The click of the camera shutter was drowned by the muffled hum of hospital machines, but the action carried consequences that none of them yet understood. He captured the image of a powerful CEO on her knees, weeping in the arms of a sick child and a man the world would deem beneath her. To Robert, it was the perfect scandal, the perfect chance to dismantle her reign. He tucked the phone back into his jacket pocket, already plotting the story he would weave. In the corridor, silence thickened once more as Marcus's eyes met Claire's over Eli's head. The boy rested peacefully against her chest, his fever-dulled body finally calm in her embrace. Claire's eyes pleaded silently, begging for a chance she knew she did not deserve. She was not asking for forgiveness, not yet. She was asking only to be allowed to stay, to try to rebuild the bond she had shattered. Marcus's chest tightened as he wrestled with the storm inside him. He could not forgive her, not so easily, but as he looked at his son, at the peace in Eli's small face, he knew the choice was no longer his alone. The past had returned with brutal force, and none of them could escape it. The wounds between them had been ripped open in the cold glow of the hospital lights, and the road ahead promised nothing but pain, suspicion, and perhaps, if fate was merciful, a fragile chance at redemption. Marcus left the hospital the next morning with shadows beneath his eyes, his body heavy from another sleepless night spent in a chair beside Eli's bed. He had barely eaten in 2 days, but food was the last thing on his mind. His thoughts circled relentlessly around Claire, around the hollow ache of seeing her hold their son with such tenderness, as if the years of absence had been nothing more than a brief pause. His anger burned as fiercely as his love for Eli, yet underneath it all lingered something more dangerous. Doubt. He questioned whether he could ever truly keep her away now that she had returned, armed not only with remorse but with power, wealth, and resources that he could never compete with. When he returned to the hospital later that day, the atmosphere around Eli's room had shifted. The dull, outdated ward with its flickering lights and chipped paint had been replaced overnight with polished floors, state-of-the-art machines, and a private nurse who hovered with practiced efficiency. Marcus stopped in the doorway, stunned as he saw Claire speaking with a group of doctors, her voice calm, commanding, her tailored suit immaculate despite the long hours. Her presence was overwhelming, like a bright flame intruding on the shadows of his world. Marcus stepped inside, his boots echoing against the gleaming tile, and his voice cut through the professional chatter like a blade. "What do you think you're doing, Claire?" His tone was sharp, his anger brimming. Claire turned, her expression momentarily softening when her eyes fell on him. "Marcus," she began carefully, "I've arranged for specialists to review Eli's condition. He's going to receive the best treatment available now." I made sure of it. His jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "The best treatment?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You think money and influence erase the years you abandoned him? You think walking in here with your power can make me forget how I held him night after night, praying he'd wake up?" Claire flinched, his words striking her with precision, but she steadied herself and answered, her tone softer now. "I'm not trying to erase anything. I know what I did. I know what I cost you both. But I can't stand by and watch him suffer when I have the means to help. This is the only way I know how to make it right." Marcus's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Make it right? You think buying doctors and nurses makes up for years of silence? Do you have any idea what it feels like to stand here and watch you swoop in, fixing everything with a snap of your fingers, while I've bled myself dry trying to keep him alive? You make me look like I can't even protect my own son." His voice cracked with the weight of the confession. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze. "I don't think you're weak, Marcus. I know how much you've sacrificed. I only want to help. Can't you see that?" But her words, no matter how earnest, felt like salt in a wound that never healed. Marcus turned away, his chest heaving with fury and humiliation. From then on, tension clung to every interaction between them. Claire arrived with new treatments, new plans, new specialists, each effort laced with her desperate attempt to prove her sincerity. But to Marcus, each gesture was another reminder of the gulf between their worlds, a gulf made wider by her wealth and his pride. Their conversations turned into battles, sharp words cutting deeper than either intended, until even Eli noticed the strain. Sometimes, as the boy drifted in and out of sleep, he would whisper, "Mommy, Daddy, please don't be mad." His tiny voice was enough to break them both, yet not enough to mend the rift. Meanwhile, in the background, Robert Miller watched with cruel satisfaction. He had begun planting whispers among board members, suggesting that Claire was misusing company resources for personal reasons. He spread the narrative carefully, seeding doubts about her judgment, about her entanglement with a struggling dock worker and a sick child. He painted her as reckless, unprofessional, unfit to lead. Each rumor spread like cracks in glass, unseen at first but growing with dangerous speed. Claire, consumed by her battle to regain her son's trust, failed to notice the gathering storm. She spent her days in the hospital, her nights poring over medical reports, barely keeping up with the demands of her empire. To Robert, it was the perfect opening, the slow unraveling of the woman who had risen too high too quickly. One late evening, Marcus sat in Eli's room, exhaustion carving heavy lines into his face. Claire entered quietly, carrying fresh documents from the specialist. For a moment she paused, watching the way Marcus held their son's hand, his thumb gently tracing circles over the boy's skin. There was a tenderness in him she had once loved, a tenderness she had abandoned but never forgotten. She wanted to speak, to bridge the gulf between them, but Marcus turned to her before she could. His voice was sharp, tired, filled with despair. "Do you really think money is the answer to everything? Do you think throwing your wealth at our son's illness makes you a mother again?" His words cracked through the room like thunder. Claire's shoulders sagged under the weight of his anger. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know how else to show you that I want to be here, that I want to stay." Marcus's eyes burned, but for the first time there was something other than rage in them. Grief, pain, helplessness. "You want to stay? Then stop making me feel like I'm nothing. Stop making me feel like I can't protect my own child." His voice broke on the last word, his pain spilling into the open. That night, Eli's fever spiked dangerously. His small body convulsed as alarms shrieked, and Marcus's world collapsed around him. Doctors rushed in, their voices urgent, their movements frantic. Marcus stood frozen, terror clawing at his throat, until Claire gripped his arm with fierce determination. "Marcus, listen to me. He needs advanced therapy now. We don't have a choice. If we don't act, we could lose him." Marcus's pride shattered in that instant. He saw only his son's pale face, his small chest rising and falling in fragile, broken rhythm. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Claire, I can't do this alone anymore. Please, save him." Claire's expression hardened with resolve. In that moment, she was not the CEO the world admired, nor the woman Marcus resented. She was simply a mother. She pulled her phone and within minutes had a team of specialists on their way. The hospital room erupted into a flurry of activity, the sound of machines and hurried footsteps filling the air. Marcus stood back, his chest heaving, as Claire commanded the chaos with precision. She wasn't thinking of power or reputation now. She was thinking only of Eli. And in the silence that followed, as Eli stabilized, Marcus realized that whatever storm lay between them, they were bound together by something stronger than anger or pride, the desperate, unyielding love for their son. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the treatment center, but for Marcus the light felt weak, fragile, as though it might shatter if he reached for it. He sat slumped in a chair by Eli's bedside, exhaustion weighing down his body, yet his eyes remained fixed on the steady rise and fall of his son's chest. The gene therapy had begun at dawn, a desperate gamble that might save Eli's life. Machines beeped softly, their rhythmic sounds like a fragile promise that the boy was still here, still fighting. Beside him, Claire stood silent, her hands clasped together, her gaze locked on the child she had once abandoned and had now returned to with every fiber of her being. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy, charged with years of bitterness, regret, and unspoken hope. When at last Marcus turned to her, his eyes red and raw, his voice came out broken but steady. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Claire, but I do know one thing. Eli needs you. If you mean to stay, then prove it, not with words but with actions." Claire nodded slowly, her throat tight. "I will, Marcus. I will never walk away again." The following days were a blur of doctors, procedures, and anxious waiting. Claire threw the full weight of her influence into the battle. She arranged for specialists to fly in, secured every cutting-edge treatment available, and transformed Eli's ward into a sanctuary where hope could breathe again. Marcus remained by his son's side, but with each step Claire took, his pride was tested, his sense of worth bruised by the reality that she could provide what he never could. Yet as he watched her sit by Eli's bed, holding the boy's tiny hand through the long nights, Marcus began to see something different. The woman who had left was not the same one who sat here now. This Claire was not cloaked in ambition and detachment. She was stripped raw, vulnerable, her love for Eli laid bare in every tremor of her hand, every tear she thought no one saw. But beyond the hospital walls, storms gathered. Robert Miller's whispers had reached the board, twisted into accusations that Claire was misusing company funds to support a dock worker and his child. To the board, the image of their CEO weeping in a hospital corridor was poison. At an emergency meeting, Robert attacked her with venomous precision. "Claire, you've crossed the line. You've allowed personal affairs to endanger the company's reputation. Your leadership is compromised." Claire stood at the head of the boardroom table, her eyes burning with resolve. For the first time in her career, she did not hide behind polished composure. She spoke with raw conviction, her voice cutting through the silence. "Yes, I helped Marcus and Eli. I will not deny it. Because in doing so, I faced a truth I had long ignored. Our hospitals, our system, have abandoned families like theirs. Poor families, minority families. We claim to serve all, but we close our doors to those who cannot pay. I refuse to look away any longer. If that makes me unfit to lead in your eyes, so be it." The board shifted uneasily, her words striking harder than Robert's accusations. She produced evidence she had quietly gathered. Testimonies, complaints, proof of discrimination buried under bureaucracy. Piece by piece, she dismantled the illusion of fairness her company had long pretended to uphold. Her final words fell like a hammer. "If you remove me for standing by my family and the values we claim to defend, then I accept it. But the world will know who truly betrayed this mission." The room fell into silence. Robert's smirk faltered as members exchanged wary glances, their certainty shaken. By the end of the meeting, Claire had not been dismissed. Instead, she walked out with her head high, her defiance echoing louder than any applause. News spread quickly. Headlines painted her not as a disgraced executive, but as a woman of courage, a leader unafraid to confront injustice. Across the city, families who had felt abandoned by the system rallied to her side. She became a symbol of change, her name linked not to scandal but to hope. Robert's schemes collapsed under the weight of her truth, and in time his own manipulations were exposed, forcing him into resignation. Back in the hospital, Marcus heard the news with quiet awe. For the first time, he saw Claire not only as the woman who had returned for her son, but as a fighter who had risked everything for what was right. When Eli's treatment finally began to show signs of success, when his heartbeat steadied and his color returned, Marcus allowed himself to breathe for the first time in months. Tears blurred his vision as he whispered a prayer of gratitude, one he never thought he would speak with her by his side. Weeks later, Eli's recovery was undeniable. He laughed again, his small body regaining strength, his eyes bright with the joy of a childhood almost stolen. Marcus and Claire walked with him through the hospital garden, their hands brushing accidentally, then deliberately. For the first time since she had returned, Marcus spoke softly without anger. "Maybe we both made mistakes, Claire, but I see now that family is not about perfection. It's about staying, even when it's hard. I want us to try again, not just for Eli, but for us." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was steady. "I want that too." More than anything, from that day forward, they began to rebuild not only their family, but their purpose. Claire used her influence to create the Eli Foundation, dedicated to helping children with rare illnesses, especially those from families who could not afford treatment. Marcus, once broken by pride, now stood proudly beside her, his strength no longer measured by money, but by the love and resilience he had always carried. At the foundation's launch a year later, Claire stood on the stage holding Marcus's hand with Eli between them. The boy beamed, his laughter echoing across the crowd of families who had come seeking hope. Claire's voice trembled with emotion as she addressed them. "I once thought success meant power, wealth, and recognition, but I was wrong. True success is love, true strength is family, and hope is something no one should ever be denied. Thunderous applause filled the hall, but Marcus heard only Eli's laughter. He turned to Claire, his voice low but filled with conviction. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, my faith in family. Claire leaned against him, her heart full. We did this together, Marcus. The golden light of evening poured through the windows, wrapping the three of them in warmth. For the first time in years, there was no anger, no pride, no fear, only love, fragile yet unbreakable, stitched together by forgiveness. Their story was no longer one of abandonment and regret, but of redemption, of a family reborn through the courage to choose each other again. And in that moment, they knew the future, no matter how uncertain, would be faced together. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from?